Hi, I'm Lucy from the Ann Arbor District Library, and I am really excited to be here today with author Ben Guterson. Ben, last time we spoke was about a year and a half ago, and we talked about your middle grade trilogy, the Winterhouse series. But we are here today to talk about your new middle grade book, The Einsteins of Vista Point. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's really nice to be back with you, Lucy, and the good folks at the Ann Arbor Library.
So I was wondering if you could just give us a synopsis of this book, because it's different from your trilogy.
It is, yeah, it is different. Here's the book here. I just happen to have it handy, of course. Yeah. And,
I do too, actually.
Oh, look at that. It's a beautiful cover, by the way. I'll mention the illustrators and so on in a moment. But in answer to your question, it is a more serious book, maybe a bit of a departure from the Winterhouse books. We're a little more rooted in fantasy and so on. This is a story of a family with the last name of Einstein. There's a mother and a father, and they have 4 children, although they used to have 5. And that's kind of the heart of the story, or the initiating point of the story. Unfortunately, about a year before the action of the book, the youngest member of the family was killed in an accident. So there's now 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And the youngest brother, named Zach, he's 11. He was with his sister when she was killed. So he feels particularly sort of guilty or grief-stricken over this. Of course, the whole family does, and they're all working through their grief. Part of working through that is they live in a place kind of like Portland, in Portland, Oregon, and they decide to change their lives after this tragic incident and move to an area about an hour to the east of the big city, where they buy some property, and they're going to run a bed and breakfast. The parents, the mother and father, just decide, we just need a real change of pace. So they buy this property, and they're going to fix up this house there and have a bed and breakfast. On the fringe of the property is this old dilapidated stone tower, which used to be kind of a stopping point or an observation point for travelers when there was a road there. And it's a beautiful bluff high above the river, like the Columbia River, basically. Basically, Zach, the youngest boy, they're living in a new place, working through this grief. And then one day he sees a girl come out of the forest and head for this stone tower. And he's very intrigued by this. And he's also a little worried, like, what's she doing all by herself? And so he wants to see what's going on. And becoming friends with this girl kind of launches him into a series of adventures, and his brothers and sisters, and he as well, at the same time, are exploring the woods all around their house, and they get involved in some adventures along the way. And hopefully, as the story progresses, a couple of the plots or subplots kind of intertwine, and the entire thing in some way will become a bit of a healing endeavor for the whole family overall, particularly for Zach. So I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but that's kind of what the story is about. I try to work in some mystery and suspense as well. Those were elements in the Winterhouse books that I think, or I hope, a lot of readers kind of responded to. And there's also some codes in the book, including the use of Morse Code. And hopefully readers will find that kind of fun, and maybe we'll harken back to the Winterhouse books for those who really like those elements, which of course I do too. I love putting stuff like that in my books. So that's kind of a brief overview of the story, I suppose.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Was there a particular inspiration for this, like something that one point that made you decide to depart on this story?
Well, the overall inspiration was just, there really is a place like this, and it really is above the Columbia River on the Oregon side. It's a beautiful spot called Crown Point, 2 words. And it's about an hour east of Portland. And maybe, folks who might happen to see this nice discussion we're having, maybe even been to this area. It's very famous. There's a road that heads out of Portland, and it winds through all these very dramatic, scenic waterfalls. One's called Multnomah Falls and Bridal Veil Falls. People in the Northwest, a lot of folks would be very familiar with this. But then as part of this, that area, you can drive up to this overlook called Crown Point, and there's a stone building there called the Vista House, and it was built in 1918, and it's a beautiful spot. In fact, a lot of times, sort of a stock photo is used of it because it's so dramatic looking. And it's kind of like an old time rest stop. Now we have rest stops on the road and you just kind of, it's like a stone building or something. And it's just kind of like a restroom, basically, and they may be picnic spots. But way back when road travel was kind of new, a place to stop and to be an observation point was like a pretty big deal. So this observation point, the Vista House, is beautiful. It's this Art Deco kind of roundish building, about 40 or 50 feet tall, and it's just in the most dramatic spot. And so I went there many years ago. I was with a few buddies, and this was like college or shortly thereafter, and it was wintertime, or February, March or something, and we just stumbled upon this place, and no one was there. And I was just blown away by how beautiful this place was. And it sort of stayed in my mind. I'm really big on settings. I love like interesting places and locations. And over the years, I just thought, wow, it'd be so cool to set a story in a place like that. And over time, just sort of ideas accumulated in my mind, just gathered together. And I thought, what if that tower became run down? And what if a family like actually owned that property and they wanted to fix it up? And then I thought, well, that's not much of a story, but like, what if something had happened to the family? And what if, like, just like something that happened to the family and they want to repair themselves, maybe they want to repair the tower too. And maybe that'll have wider ramifications. How these things go when you think about stories, and it just kind of all gathered together. And I tried to pull it into a sort of a single narrative. But the short answer for the inspiration was being at that spot. It's so beautiful and so evocative. It stayed in my mind for, literally like decades, I guess, if I want to age myself. So the spot was the inspiration, no doubt about it.
Well, yeah. And it's for you to say that like setting is so important for you. I think the descriptions in your book of this spot are so evocative. And I really feel like when you're reading it, you can imagine it. And also like the descriptions of them going to the water, to go swimming, and there's waterfalls, and you really can, or I felt myself really being able to picture where they were. I really like doing that in stories, and I like doing it in the Winterhouse books, the hotel where all this stuff can happen. To me, I love books, and hopefully I can bring some of the sensibility to my books, where the setting is almost like another character in the book. And that's just my bias. Other writers do different things, and that's totally fine. I just like doing that rather than thinking of the setting as just a place to sort of like establish, so then you can really get going with all the other stuff. I like to think of the setting as sort of playing a role throughout, as helping to shape the story in some way. So it's nice that you mentioned you sort of felt that as well as you read the book. I hope readers do feel that, because I like to take time doing that. Yeah, I think there's very much a sense that it's a character in this book, as with the Winterhouse books. I also feel like the Einstein family itself is sort of its own character. I mean, there are the family members, and they're all unique and different, but I really enjoyed the family dynamic in this book. They're dealing with this grief, but then they also have these, they've reinstated their Shabbat ritual, but then they have these family jokes that are really funny. And so just the dynamic felt so real to me. And I was wondering, how you created that family, like what helped you come up with such a real family?
Well, I think any book anyone writes is in some degree autobiographical. And definitely there were elements of that in this Einstein book. It wasn't a recreation of my own personal family, with my own children or anything. And there was no real fidelity between this and like my upbringing, although I do have two brothers and two sisters. I had a large family, and there maybe is some slight overlap. But, I like books, middle grade or children's books where there are large families and there are siblings. Like I really loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when I was a kid. I mean, tons of readers have. I wasn't all that excited about some of the other books in the Chronicles of Narnia, but I really liked that first one, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I love this series of books, the Melendi Quartet, Elizabeth Enright. I think they were written in the 50s, maybe in the 60s, and Brothers and Sisters. There's another series by a man, I think his name is Edwin Eager, the Magic series. The first one was called Half Magic, where the kids can make all these wishes and they only come half true. It's really a cool book. There's the Penderwicks, Gene Birdsall, I think is the author. Those are more recent, last 15, 20 years. I really like those books, but the books I've just been nuts about for a long time are a series by Arthur Ransom called Swallows and Amazons. And they were written in the 30s and maybe even into the 40s. And I don't know how well they've aged for some people. I still love them. I love to read them. And they're about, two brothers and two sisters. And they have all these adventures and they're real like plucky kids and they're always doing all this fun stuff. And I just really like that kind of thing. I thought, I'd like to try to write a story like that. I'll tell you, one of the difficulties I had though was I really did want to focus on Zach in the story. So in some ways, it's not really an ensemble book about the whole family. It's really mostly about Zach, but I wanted to have show nice interactions with his brothers and sisters and with his parents. And I wanted to show a family that, despite differences or challenging times they were going through, and, maybe some really hard interactions, that the general trend was to all sort of get along and try to heal. I like thinking about that in any family as a possibility. So those were some things I was thinking about. And yeah, I definitely drew on some of my own family dynamics and interactions and way of joking and so on. It was definitely in the book. But that's kind of why I structured the book the way I did. I could have just been Zach and, with one sister or something, but I wanted to make it a little broader, a little more fun, I think.
Yeah, and the family to me seemed important because like everyone is going through their own healing and their own way of grieving, and I think you do a really good job of showing how that's different for everybody, even within the same family. We see it mostly with Zach, and he really seems to be having the hardest time. I'm wondering how you struck a balance between putting like the sense of grief and loss in your book, but then also putting in humor and adventure and mystery and puzzles. And how did you decide, how far into that grief you were going to go?
Well, it's a tough mix. You don't want the book to be like, a downer for people to read. I mean, on the other hand, you want it to be a realistic, or as much a realistic sort of depiction as you can make it. You don't want to just sort of gloss over this thing. So if you're going to write a book where the youngest member has passed away, it can't just be swiftly discarded and move on to a bunch of fun stuff, So, but on the other hand, if it's only about exploring grief, I think it would be really hard for readers to find a lot of enjoyment, much enjoyment in it. That would be really tough. So, I just thought, I want to show a family that's trying to find ways to transmute this grief into looking forward. Like there's sort of the sense that, our deceased sister most likely would not have wanted us to wallow in like incapacitating sadness forever. We can definitely, and of course we will miss her. We'll feel great sadness over her passing and so on, but we can't allow that to hobble us or stop our lives or our growth or any enjoyment we can have in anything. So that's sort of why I wanted to have it that the family goes to a new place, because just the dynamics of having to start a new life, new school, new way of earning a living, new house, new places to, in the forest and the town nearby to discover, all that would sort of naturally, I think, kind of draw all of them into a new way of life, and they can remember their sister or their daughter, but they also need to commit themselves to a new existence. So it was a really tough balance to strike. I have not been in that situation. Didn't draw on anything from my own experience. I, thankfully have not had the tragic experience of losing a child or someone like that in any way. So I wasn't drawn on personal experience, but I wanted to find a way to strike a balance. You want the book to be something interesting for people and not just ongoing like, oh, this is so sad. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you achieve that. And you do, the way you address the grief is very respectful and compassionate. And so I thought the balance was great. And, I think because you're introducing the element of mystery pretty early, like I would say with Anne, we kind of get hints right away, maybe that there's something a little bit mysterious about her. And it was kind of a slow reveal that's pretty relevant to the story. So when you're writing something like that, do you have is there someone who's a sounding board or something, so that you're just like, am I giving too much away? Or is that just something you have a sense of? Because it's very effective the way you did it.
Well, it's mostly just a sense of it. I don't want to sort of overestimate my own capacity for that, but I like to think I have a sense of things and can kind of look at my own writing objectively. My wife has always been fantastic at reading over stuff and letting me know what's up. And then my editor, Christy Ottaviano, at Little Brown, does a great job of that. She reads my stuff obviously and gives me feedback. Yeah, I mean, there is a slow reveal and there's a mystery aspect to it, and in any book like that, some readers will say, "Oh, I spotted something right away," and all that. And others will be like, "Oh, wow, I was blown away." And you never know. That's just how it is. And the book is aimed at young people. It's aimed at readers 8 to 12. So the sorts of things that an adult might say, "Oh, I picked that out right away," may be different for younger people, and you just never know. And I'm not real big on sort of like, oh, these big reveals or, some like, remember the movie The Sixth Sense and you're blown away at the very end by something you learn, or like the Twilight Zone thing, a big twist at the end. That's kind of fun, but I'm not necessarily hugely invested in surprising or shocking people at the end. If someone could see something coming, that's totally fine. I hope that there's an emotional kind of investment and a pleasure in seeing how everything's going to be tied together by the end of the book. To me, for a reader, that would be more satisfying than sort of surprising someone. But you're right, Lucy. You don't want to write something where the reader is so aware of something that the characters in the story aren't aware of, that for like 50 pages they're like, come on, characters, I saw this already, it was so obvious, why don't you get with it? So you have to strike a real balance, and it's not always easy to do.
Yeah, I can imagine that it would be difficult to sometimes be subtle, but I think what you were saying about that, making that emotional connection, the way that you do sort of tell us Anne's story, as an adult reader, I felt more invested in the emotional connection than really. It didn't matter to me what the mystery about Anne was. I knew it was there, because then you have these other sort of elements of mystery with the the code and the puzzle, like the medallion and figuring that out, which reminded me a lot of Winterhouse.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how you settled on Morse code, because I know that, and we talked about it when we talked about Winterhouse, but how many different kind of puzzles and ciphers there are out there that could be fun to put in the book.
Well, as you know, from such a generous, nice reading of the book you've done, there's this moment in the story. I'm not giving anything away to people who might see this and haven't read the book. There's a moment when the four kids are sitting by the tower early on in the story, late at night. They're looking at the stars. It's a beautiful place. And they see across the river someone flashing a light at them. And that really gets kind of the engine of sort of the second mystery in the book sort of going. And they're like, who is doing this? And they sort of surmise right away, that must be Morse code. Like, people don't just sort of do that kind of flashing from a distance just mean it's not just some random flashlight or a car headlights or something, flickering away. Someone must be deliberately sending a message. So, you see something like that, really almost anyone in the Western world, or maybe the entire world, I don't really know, would sort of imagine if someone's flashing lights in a very deliberate sequence, they probably leap to thinking that's got to be Morse code. So I just wanted to pull that in, and then the kids and the readers are like, or the readers at least I hope would be thinking, what's going on? Like, who in the world late at night would be flashing lights in the middle of nowhere at these kids? It really seems bizarre. What is happening here? So, my hope is that readers would be intrigued by that. Obviously, the kids are in the story, and they want to know what's going on. But it was really fun to learn about Morse code. I didn't know much about it. Probably like a lot of people, you kind of always heard of Morse code, but like dots and dashes and what's that all about? And they click this little thing and it sends a signal, 1,000 miles away, or people flash lights when they're on an island or something. And I never knew much about it really, but I learned a little bit. It doesn't take long to learn. You can look at a YouTube video or whatever, and it's pretty interesting the more you know about it. I found out some pretty cool things about Morse code, but it just seemed like a natural to use that if I'm going to have kids exposed to flickering lights from across the other side of the river.
Well, yeah, and I really appreciated the visual that you had for the Morse code later. I don't know, when we're figuring it out, because then you can look at the Morse code yourself. I did, to try and be like, can I get this on my my own? So I enjoyed that, and that was fun to do. And that kind of reminds me of some of the illustrations that you have in this book, which are wonderful illustrations, and they seem to reflect so well what you're writing about. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the illustrations, but also how that relationship crops up, because I would imagine the pairing might be difficult to get so right, but it seems very spot on in this book.
Well, first off, I really do have to give great credit. The cover was done by a woman named Vivian Toe. She's done lots of covers for books. It's really beautiful and, kind of evocative, I guess. There's the kids going out and there's the tower in the distance there. And so you're like, what's going on? Yeah, interestingly enough, the interior illustrations were done by someone else, a gentleman named Peter Antonsen. And here's one. They're really well done. They're beautiful. They're really finely done. That's that scene that I mentioned where there's lights flashing at the kids from across the way. There's about maybe 20 of those black and white illustrations in the book. So, I mean, to me, I thought it was kind of interesting that one person did the cover and another person did the interior illustrations. And they're both beautiful and they're both kind of different stylistically. But to your sort of larger question, one thing I've discovered in being an author and working on these books is I really don't have any contact with the illustrator at all. The book company chooses the illustrator. I suppose maybe I would have veto power if I just was completely displeased or something, or I just thought that does not look at all. But the two illustrators that Christy Ottaviano and the team at Little Brown, found, however they find these people, are just stellar. I mean, they're just amazing artists, and obviously, and so I couldn't have been happier. I'm exposed to the illustrations as we go, and my feedback is taken like, no, that doesn't match the text, or there's something off there, So just to make sure that everything matches up correctly with the words and the images, I do play a role there, because obviously you don't want to have some mistake that's going to confuse readers. You're looking at the picture like, that's not what I read a couple pages ago. So you want to make sure that all syncs up. But in terms of there being like a relationship between me and the authors, there really isn't. It's just sort of some back and forth that's kind of brokered through my editor. And that's how that works. Fortunately, the book, the folks at Little Brown are so skilled in all this. They know exactly how to find the right illustrator to really illuminate or bring to life aspects of the story. So I just couldn't be more thrilled with this.
Yeah, I thought, the illustrations in this seem very reflective of like the tone of the story. And I was going back and looking at Winterhouse, which is a different illustrator, and you can see there too that the style seems to sort of pair with the book. So that's, you know.
Yeah, well, before you go on, I got to give credit. A woman named Chloe Bristol illustrated the 3 Winterhouse books, and she was just fantastic. And she had this kind of whimsical, almost gothic kind of style that just matched perfectly, and she was just fantastic. She's gone on to do all kinds of like great stuff, but yeah, she was just amazing. Really, really great artist.
Yeah, those were really unique and particularly fitting for that set of books.
Yeah.
So that's fun. And speaking of books, well, and you brought up earlier Swallows and Amazons, and so I have to ask about Falcons and Bandits, because it seems like this is a very similar series of books. And I remember the Swallows and Amazons from when I was younger. But I just, I remember in Winterhouse, you had specific titles that you talked about that were real books.
Yeah.
And in this, you have the Falcon and Bandits, which seem to be a real nod to Swallows and Amazons, but also there's this comfort for Zach. Like, I would say that's where he turns in his grief. So I was wondering if there are books that you find to be, or you did find to be comfort books at any time, like in your childhood or now, or at all.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. The Falcons and Bandits was just my fictionalizing of Swallows and Amazons. I guess I could just done Swallows and Amazons, but because it's a series in the book, in my book, and Zach is reading each one, I just didn't want a lot of distraction, a lot of repeating of that. So I just made up one that is an homage, I guess you could say, to the Swallows and Amazons. But those are definitely comfort books for me. I really like to read them still. I love getting wrapped up. And there's all this nautical stuff, and I just sort of skim past some of that. But the rest of it is just, really, really fun. I love that. I was thinking about this just the other day. Last year, I reread the book 100 Years of Solitude, and I've probably read it 6 or 7 times in my life. And that book is a real solace to me. I don't fully know why. Sometimes you revisit a book that you read years ago and you're like, oh, wow, I don't like, it's like this hasn't aged well, or I haven't aged well or something. But that book I find just a real like healer. I don't know why. I'm trying to think more of the reason why. Another book that I really enjoy reading, a kid's book, is it's called The Thief Lord by Cornelia. Her last name is spelled Funke. I never know it's Funk or Funke or something, but she's a German author, and she wrote the Inkheart books. She's very famous around the world. Millions of kids have read her books. But The Thief Lord, for some reason, I don't know that it's the greatest kids book ever, but there's something about that book that I really enjoy. I love a book called The House with a Clock in Its Walls by John Bel Ayres, because I was exposed to it when I was in 5th grade, and I've read that one maybe 20 times. It's another one of those ones. So those are some of the books that I sort of like to reread. I'm sure after you and I end this conversation, I'll think of another 20, but those are just some off the top of my head.
Yeah, I know it's always that way. Like, oh, I should have said this. Yeah. But I appreciate that, because I'm someone who's always been greatly comforted by books. So I liked seeing it in this story, and I like hearing what you enjoy returning to. Were there any books that you feel like this book, Einsteins of Vista Point, is kind of in conversation with? Like,
gosh, I guess I would have to say no. I would really need to think about that. Either I've blanked it out of my mind, or just there's nothing that sort of comes to me right off the bat. I mean, there are kids' books where kids are feeling lonely or desperate or trying to make sense of their world. And I think about some of those. A book I loved when I was a kid was The Phantom Toll Booth, about a kid who specifically, it's total fantasy, but he's just sort of like in a malaise. He's just like bored with life, and he needs a new direction or something. And in some way, Zach, it's not really all that similar, but there's some aspects of that that I think, maybe can parallel Zach. There's a book I really like by Colin Malloy. He's actually singer-songwriter for the group The Decemberists, and he wrote a trilogy called Wildwood. I mean, it's fantastic. The guy's like he's a rock musician, or an indie musician, but he also writes kids' books. It's like amazing. But he wrote a book called The Whiz Mob and the Grenadine Kid. I don't know that it got a lot of attention, but it was about a kid who really is feeling, he's in Marseille with his father, who's a diplomat in the early 60s. And he's just sort of all alone and kind of aimless and all that. And he meets a group of kids who are pickpockets, and he launches into this adventure. There's nothing really that aligns with the Einsteins of Vista Point, but just a notion of a kid who's just feeling kind of alone and kind of wants a new adventure or new friends. It's really those kinds of things rather than the specifics of like a sibling who's died that kind of are in my head more. What is it when kids are going through situations where they feel like they need something more and they're looking for something more to grow up or make sense of their lives? So maybe I'm in conversation with books like that now that I've talked through my answer.
Yeah.
That's what's coming to my head.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And so what is it about like middle grade specifically that you are drawn to? Like why that is where you choose to do your writing?
Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, I love to read. Reading's my favorite thing in the world. And books have always been like, my best friends, or I should say among my best friends. No slight to my real friends, right? But, as you mentioned earlier, books are such a comfort, and they always have been to me from the earliest age. But really, it was during that middle grade period, 8 to 12, when you're moving out of like reading books that were given to you by, your mom or your teacher or librarian, and you're suddenly like choosing your own stuff to read, you're gravitating. That I think really happens in the middle grade stage. Books become more sophisticated, more of a personal experience than they were previously. And suddenly you're exposed to this amazing world of stories that you can choose and delve into. So books at that stage in my life were hugely important. Also, it cements your love of reading. I think if you get to be like, a teenager and you're not really in love with reading, it's not impossible, but I think it just becomes more and more difficult to really have that as a lifelong thing for you. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's sort of how I feel. So I like writing books for that age group because I know how important books were for me at that age, that stage of my life. And if I can in any way give that experience to some readers who might stumble upon my books, that would be a real thrill for me. Also, I don't think I could write books for the next level up, YA, like 13 to 18 or above. I hope I don't misstep in what I'm about to say here, but the some of those books deal with themes or come at themes in a way that are much more mature, and rightly so. I mean, that's what stage life for people. And you can make some wrong moves as an author and kind of get into some really tricky territory there. So for me, it's not only safer at the younger level, and I don't just mean I just want to avoid controversy, but in a way it feels actually more liberating. I feel like I can deal with subject matter and not kind of have some concerns around things that might crop up with older audiences who can be a little more demanding and a little more severe about if they have trouble with something they find in your book, So it actually feels more freeing for me to write books for ages 8 to 12 because people are more exploring things then and maybe are a little less hardened in some of their views or their notions about the world as they get a little bit older. Again, I don't mean to be critical of any age group or any author or anything like that. I'm just speaking for what sort of works for me and why I'm attracted to that age group there. So I hope that I kind of covered it and answered it appropriately.
Oh yeah, I think that's actually really interesting what you're saying about it being more liberating. I didn't think about it in that way. So that's kind of fascinating to me. And I do think that like for me, hearing you say that, middle grade is sort of when you felt like the doors opened up to reading for you. I do think that there's a sense when you're that age and you're reading that's like a real, if you love it, it's a real feeling, And so I enjoy going back now to middle grade books, like reading the Einsteins of Vista Point and getting that feeling again. That's really enjoyable. So we just had our kids writing contest at the library. And so I was wondering if you had like any advice for aspiring writers, or a little bit about your writing process that you could tell us.
Well, my biggest advice I'd say is be a reader. I mean, read everything, like read good stuff. Like I know we all get attached to, a certain genre or a certain author or something like that. But I think readers who push themselves to expand their the sorts of books that they read and the difficulty level and so on, it exposes you to plots and writing styles that will only sort of increase your own sort of repertoire of possibilities for narrative and character and sentence structure and all those sorts of things. So I really think the first requirement for anyone who wants to be a writer or a good writer is read as much as you can and read good stuff, magazines, whatever it is, just push yourself to read really good stuff. The other thing, obviously you just have to write a lot. And while you're doing all that reading, hopefully you're sort of imbibing and taking in a lot of different ways of putting sentences together in really effective ways. But really study what it means to create effective characters or interesting plots or lush, vivid settings, and read books about writing and take classes about writing and share, if you're inclined, share your writing with other people and get feedback. It's hard, but you can't be thin-skinned. Like if you just want to show your writing to someone because you want them to pat you on the back, it may not be such a help, the hard feedback, the critical feedback that you get is really, really important. The other thing is you have to be prepared to edit your work and revise it. Sometimes I notice with younger writers that they might write something and, oh, I'm done, I did it, but really you have to be prepared to look at it really hard and make a lot of changes. If you fall in love with your words and you're like, no, I'm not going to change this stuff, it's going to be really hard for you to make progress as a writer. So yeah, I would say that. The one last thing, if I may just add one more, I love to write. And I think if you don't really love to write, it's going to be a hard journey to have success as a writer. Because if what you really love is having a book that you can show to people or making money or becoming famous, those are all things out of your hands. The only thing you can control is the writing. And so you have to love to write, like every day. Like if you love to play basketball, you'll go outside and shoot free throws. If you love to play saxophone, you'll just do it every day. You're not thinking, oh, I need to be a famous whatever. You just love to do it. If you don't have that for writing, it's really hard to become a good writer. So I don't want to start ascending the soapbox here in any way. So I'll stop with that. But those are some of my thoughts about being a writer.
Yeah, I think that's all really good advice for aspiring writers. So what is next from you? What can we be looking forward to reading?
Well, I just finished the first manuscript, the first draft of my next book. Right now it's tentatively called The Number 9 Plaza. It's about a 19-story tall, it's the largest department store in the entire world in southern Siberia. And a boy named Herbert Olinga, his grandmother, Zina Weinby, owns and runs this department store, and Herbert gets to spend the summer with her because his parents are professors and they're going elsewhere. And as you might imagine, right away, there's a mystery that's going on in this department store. But the department store itself is just like over the top. It has everything from everywhere. And I love, creating this world of this enormous department store. And Herbert will get involved in this mystery to try to help his grandmother. A golden plate went missing in the store 40 years before, and there's a possibility it might resurface during his time there, and he wants to help his grandmother and all the other people in the store see if they can discover this plate. So it's the first of a projected 2-book series, and it's been huge fun to work on this. And and I hope readers will enjoy it. It should be out, I don't know, sometime in 2023. Publication schedules are very changeable and so on, as I've discovered. So I don't know, but I think it's projected to be out sometime in 2023, maybe summer or autumn. That may slip, but I don't really know. But that's what I'm working on, and it's just really, really been a fun thing to do. So yeah.
That sounds really really fun, and just even hearing like 19-story department store in Siberia, I'm just like, okay, yes, I want to read that. It sounds interesting.
Well, I spent a ton of time doing research on all these great department stores around the world, particularly in the United States, that are now long gone. But I mean, it used to be department stores where like people would dress up and go for an outing for the day, and these stores had everything. You know, before you could do shopping online, or you could do whatever it is, think of like, 100 years ago, to go to a department store was like a huge deal. And so these stores were just like palaces of consumerism and products and restaurants and entertainment. And so I tried to bring all that to this department store that I've created.
Well, I am really looking forward to that one. That will be great. So is there anything else that you want to add that I didn't get to today?
Well, I don't know, Lucy, you covered it pretty well, pretty thoroughly. I just have enjoyed, the launch of the Einsteins of Vista Point has been really fun, and I had a chance to connect with the readers and, people online like yourself. And I'll get out to Ann Arbor one of these days and get to meet you and the good people there in person, and that would be a real thrill. But yeah, I don't think anything else really. We've had such a nice conversation so far, and I just appreciate the chance to be able to connect with you again and talk to you, and maybe some of the patrons at your library will have a chance to see this discussion as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for talking with me. I was really excited to be chatting with you about this book. It was a pleasure to read. So thank you.
My pleasure. Huge thanks, and great to talk to you again. I appreciate it very much.